Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Video Game Growing Pains' podcast series slash video series on Final Fantasy and its history. Now, many will dispute the golden era of Final Fantasy. Some will say that Final Fantasy VII ushered in RPGs into the mainstream, that it was the start of the golden age of RPGs. I tend to disagree. I love Final Fantasy VII, but I think from a mechanics, storytelling, and character perspective, as well as from a certain graphical perspective, the golden era of Final Fantasy started with Final Fantasy IV. Now, the elephant in the room is, of course, that Final Fantasy IV was released in the US on the Super Nintendo as Final Fantasy II. Please ignore that. The Japanese were assuming the Americans at the time were stupid. They never expected 2 and 3 to be released outside of Japan, so they just thought, we'll call Final Fantasy IV 2 and no one will be the wiser. It makes for naming conventions a bit difficult much later. Anyway, Final Fantasy IV is pretty much amazing in every single way, and I don't say that just as a fanboy. Graphically, it's an incredible step up from the Nintendo and the Famicom. You see, there were limitations with the Nintendo and the Famicom. People had tried to get around them. I talked about how in Final Fantasy II, for example, they had characters losing a battle as part of the story that helped develop it. Final Fantasy IV had battles that would have text in it, characters acting of their own accord without player input. They would just do something. These were the precursors to the cinematics that we all know so well today, and for better or worse, it really fleshed out the storytelling. When you could see Cecil attacking something and just showing his strength as he walked through it, or Tella, the wizard, sacrificing his life to take down an impossibly strong enemy. More than just the graphical fidelity and the ability to input story into the battles, we also had very expressive sprites. There were a number of facial animations that could be done with each sprite, and more than that, the sprites could perform certain actions. On screen, some of them could cast magic, they could hit one another, and it gave a lot more character to the different characters. Palom and Porom, for example, are twins, and they are frequently fighting and bickering, with Porom trying to keep her mischievous brother in line. And you get this because you will see Porom go up and slap Palom on the back of the head several times. You'll see Cecil and Rosa embrace. You'll see Cain the Dragoon run off cackling like a madman. These things were possible to a limited degree in previous Final Fantasies, but with the new technology, there was so much more memory and there was so much more ability to express emotions. It was just amazing. But alright, let's talk story. This is probably the strongest point in Final Fantasy IV outside of the battle system. Final Fantasy IV went away from some of the blank slate characters or the wishy-washy stories of the previous era. Final Fantasy IV is a tale of redemption, of how Cecil the Dark Knight realizes that he's stealing crystals for an empire, crystals that are elemental and help keep the world in balance. And he hates it. And because of this, he's demoted and ends up walking a path of redemption. He destroys a village on accident and saves the last survivor, determined to save other villages from the fate that he himself was inflicting on people, stealing their crystals. And in the process, he redeems himself, learns of a dark plot surrounding the world, and ends up not only having to try and go to every corner of the world to save it, he goes under the world, underground, the Kingdom of Dwarves, and perhaps even beyond the planet itself. I won't give away too many spoilers, even though the game is several decades old at this point. But it is an amazing story, and all of the characters have something to say and something to add. There are betrayals, there are humorous moments, and there are elements of incredible storytelling within the battle scenes, as I've told you. For example, one time somebody saves you in a battle scene, and it seems like all is lost, and you don't know what to do, and it just happens. It's amazing. But since we're talking battle, let's talk about the battle system. The battle system is active time battle. What does that mean? It means you have a compromise between real-time combat, like in The Legend of Zelda, and turn-based combat, like in the original Final Fantasy. You still take turns, but those turns are determined by speed. You go in a different order. The slower you are, the less turns you get. faster you are, the more turns you get. It's an interesting idea that allows a lot more dynamic game design. For example, if you slow your enemies, you can prevent a massive damage attack, or you can prolong a protective period they're in, which is just going to frustrate the living hell out of you. And it was very intelligent in that way. Enemies could use this system to, say, go into more aggressive poses where the enemy needs to hit you harder, so you, the player, needs to defend, or heal, or just not attack. It was brilliant in that they could alter the way people thought about timing. Spells took time to cast, attacks took time to cast, and ultimately you could get screwed out if you took too much time selecting an item. It was very challenging, but also very rewarding. Alongside the timing, you also got characters who all had special abilities. Some of them could use unique magics, others had item based abilities. Perhaps the most iconic is Cain the Dragoon. His ability to jump allowed him to leave the battlefield temporarily and then come back and hit an opponent for massive damage. But this gave each and every character an identity. No longer could you just select their class and basically have whoever you wanted. Each character had strengths and weaknesses, and it helped flesh out the characters outside of battle as well as inside. Inside of battle, though, it gave them a very unique feel. Some characters could be frustrating to deal with, such as Edward the Bard, who was very weak. But his songs could be incredibly useful as a support skill. They could heal, they could confuse, they could put enemies to sleep. And other characters, like Cid, who could only see an enemy's weakness, felt a bit useless at times. But still, we appreciated the effort that was put into each character. Perhaps the most beloved character is Rydia the Summoner, who was not only raised by summoners, but raised by summoned beasts as well. You could not only summon incredibly powerful monsters with her, but you could tame certain monsters so that she could summon them at her will. It was an incredibly deep battle system, just by adding that one little command that you could have each character do a unique attack. Very impressive. And it was improved even further with the ability to choose where your party will, sit in the battlefield. Frontline fighters could take the brunt of damage, while back row fighters like spellcasters took less damage. It was very well thought out. All of this together makes Final Fantasy IV quite good. The music, however, puts it over the top. Nobuo Uematsu, finally having hit his stride with 8-bit, comes and starts trying to write 16-bit music. Final Fantasy IV is not his pinnacle, but it is a very fun soundtrack with lots of quiet and somber moments as well as bombastic and incredible moments. More than just all of that together is the complete package of it. I think it was balanced perfectly on the Super Nintendo because while it was challenging, it was never too tough. Herein lies my biggest complaint with Final Fantasy IV. The Super Famicom and the subsequent re-release on the PlayStation 1 as Final Fantasy Chronicles brings the difficulty to a rather insane degree. Now, not at first. You can get through a good 8/10 of the game without any problem. But the last leg of the game becomes so difficult it's almost unplayable. I managed to beat the PlayStation 1 version by grinding for almost 3 days straight to defeat the final boss. Little ridiculous. That being said, I don't want you to be scared away from this game. Final Fantasy IV is amazing. It has some incredibly memorable characters, and I don't just mean the good guys. The Four Fiends of the Element are still held as one of the most widely remembered group of villains in Final Fantasy, probably second only to Gilgamesh himself. And they aren't the main baddies, they serve the main baddies. We also have an incredible number of plot twists and several strange occurrences. I wasn't kidding about going beyond the planet, but it all feels organic, it all feels woven into the story. This is why I think Final Fantasy IV was the start of a golden era. Everything was perfect. The pacing, the combat, the graphics got just expressive enough to tell a more fleshed out story, but not so in depth that we started to lose focus. The music was great, and it was all wrapped together in this wonderful package. Now, there is another elephant in the room I'm going to need to address. I'm going to take a separate video to do that. So, next time, we are going to be talking about Final Fantasy IV, The After Years.